Board. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so you all should see the Office of the Dean website. And on the Office of the Dean website, we actually have a tab for digital measures. And this is going to be where you'll find all of the teaching materials that we put together to help you through the digital measures process. So I'm going to go to that. You'll see there's a frequently asked questions page. In about the middle of the screen, there's a series of written tutorials. There's one on how to log in. There's one on just generally how to enter data into digital measures. There's a specific one on how to look up impact factors for journals if that's something that affects you. This one here is an important one. It shows you how to pull a copy of your own CV out of the system so that you can preview it or use it for other purposes. And then these two we won't cover today since we're focusing mostly on extension. And I don't think I have EndNote installed on this computer, but there is a way that you can bulk import publication information from EndNote and from Web of Science into digital measures. And so if that's something that you're interested in, you can either refer to either of these written tutorials, or you can give me a call sometime and I can talk to you about that. Some of the tutorials we also have in video form. There's one on just how to log in, one on how to enter data generally, and then how to look up impact factors. And hopefully, if this recording turns out well, we'll be able to get one posted about extension activities here in the next few days. The main thing I want to draw your attention to, though, on our Office of the Dean Digital Measures webpage is the data entry guide. This is what I think of as like the handbook or the Bible for how to use digital measures. Digital measures is a system that's being used by multiple colleges at the University of Kentucky, and each one is using it a little differently. Because of that, we can't change the user interface for the system in a way that would negatively impact the ability of the other colleges to be able to use digital measures. And so what we've done instead is create this guide for how the College of Agriculture wants you to use digital measures. And that'll become more apparent about why we had to do that here in a few minutes when we log into digital measures. But for now, I'm going to open up the data entry guide here. This is an interactive PDF. I update it pretty regularly and send you notifications when it's updated. So always make sure you're using the most up-to-date version. This one is the most up-to-date version. It's from September of this year. It is interactive, so you can click anything in the guide that looks like a button, and it really is a button. So if we wanted to find out how to enter some extension activities, we would go to the extension section, and then each of these is a different button that will take you to the instructions for how to enter that type of activity. So I'm going to click on the workshops and webinars, for example, and this is going to take me to the instructions for how to information about workshops and webinars. If you would prefer to use this data entry guide as a printed out paper document, you can do that too. I did create an index. So if you go to the index, which is the last page, you can print just the pages that are relevant to you, and so that way you don't have to waste paper and print the whole 49-page document. So for instance, you could set your computer just to print pages 10 through 18 if you only wanted the extension activities. So I'm going to go back to the interactive menu and back to that extension workshops and webinars page that we were looking at. So in the data entry guide, there's essentially 4 sections to each set of instructions. At the top of the screen, you'll see the definition for this activity type. This is how the college administrators are defining this activity type, and it helps us to all be on the same page to know what we're talking about when we use, like for instance, the term workshop or webinar. In the yellow box, you'll see the digital measures screen. This is going to tell you what screen or page in digital measures this activity would be entered in. So you would enter extension workshops and webinars on the screen extension education and training programs, which appears under our new extension heading in digital measures. The blue box is really, really important. This is the list of data fields that you are asked to enter for any given type of activity. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of data fields that you could possibly enter data into in digital measures. What we did is we took a list of all of those hundreds to thousands of data fields and gave them to our committee of faculty that helped plan the implementation of digital measures, and then to our department chairs and to our associate deans and dean. And they whittled it down to just the bare minimum of what they want to see for your performance review. And so the blue box represents that bare minimum of fields that you are being asked by the college to populate. And it's important to note that if you enter information into data fields that aren't listed in the blue box, that information might not show up on your CV. In fact, in most cases, it won't show up on your CV. So at that point, you would have done a lot of work that the college isn't asking you to do and that nobody's going to see. And that's a waste of your time, which is very valuable, and we don't want to see you wasting your time. And so that's why it's really important to refer to these relevant data fields. There's also going to be a green box on each page that just has some general tips, clarifying things that might be confusing about entering that type of activity or something that you might just need a bit more explanation about. Okay, so that's the data entry guide. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in on a second tab to the digital measure system itself and show you around that a bit. So I'm opening a second tab, and I'm going to go to MyUK. It's important to note that digital measures isn't compatible with the Microsoft Edge or Microsoft Explorer browsers, so you'll need to use Firefox, Chrome, or Safari browser. If you try to open digital measures in Internet Explorer, you just get a blank screen that doesn't look like anything's there. Okay, so digital measures is accessed through the MyUK portal. It's going to be on the Faculty Services tab, and there should be a tab for digital measures. Sometimes these tabs on the dark blue bar tabs show up in a different order for different people. So for me, digital measures is the last tab, but it might not be the last tab for you. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to open up. I have to select a faculty member to masquerade as. You won't have this step when you enter it for yourself. So I'm going to use our test account. Okay, so this would be the screen that when you, as a faculty member, log into digital measures, this would be the first screen that you see. This is our main menu for digital measures. I'm going to open up one of these screens. I'm going to open up the consulting screen. So I'll check consulting here. And to add a new item, I would select the Add New Item button. Okay, so here you see there's a whole bunch of different data fields that you could potentially enter information into. But again, the college isn't asking you to populate every data field that you see in Digital Measures, only the ones that we're considering relevant and important for your performance review. So I'm going to go back on my first tab here to the data entry guide, going back to the list of extension activities, and I'm going to go to the consulting instructions. So if I'm looking at the instructions for consulting, you see that there's the list of data fields here. I'll take a second to explain how we're considering consulting in the context of extension. So there's two different ways that you could think about this. The first is a one-time visit to like a producer's farm or a location that you are being asked to give advice to solve a problem for a constituent because you're the expert. But it's going to be more of a one-on-one type situation as opposed to when you give a presentation to a whole group of producers. The second way that you can think of consulting in the context of extension is for all of those phone calls and emails that you answer throughout the year where you are being asked questions by constituents, again, because you're the expert in the field, and you might have like hundreds or thousands of these phone calls and email inquiries over the course of the year. So I'm going to show you in this example how you would summarize those phone call and email inquiries that you get. So I'm going to move back to the Digital Measures tab that I have open that's still on our consulting screen. And I'm going to say the first piece of information that we're going to enter is the consulting type. So I'm going to my consulting screen, add new item. Okay, in the consulting type, I'm going to say that I'm answering questions from business and industry representatives. In this example, we'll say that I'm answering questions from beef cattle producers. Actually, sorry, messed up there. So the beef cattle producers is going to go in the client or organization. So in this example, I'm summarizing a whole group of people that might come to me throughout the year and ask me questions. If I was instead providing an example of one consultation that I gave to one producer, instead of summarizing as beef cattle producers, I would just list the name of that individual or company or business. Okay, so the compensated or pro bono box is not on our list of relevant data fields, so we're going to skip that. Okay, we are going to populate this box here that says extension with the yes. So what this does, the extension yes, no box, if I put the yes in that box, it's going to report this consulting activity under the extension heading in my CV instead of under the service heading where consulting would normally appear. Okay. Next, I'm going to skip to the description of activities because these two boxes here aren't in our relevant data fields list. So in this example, I'm summarizing all of the calls and emails that I get from beef cattle producers over the course of a year. And so I'm going to say approximately 500 inquiries by phone and email about beef cattle diseases. Okay, since I'm summarizing, the location information is not really relevant. If you're mostly getting these calls and inquiries from within Kentucky and you want to show that, you could populate Kentucky in the drop-down state box, but for this summary example, it's not really necessary. So the last piece of information that our data entry guide tells me is important to enter is the start date and end date. So the start date and end dates, there's a few different ways that you can enter this information in digital measures. If I enter only a start date, then this is going to appear as an ongoing activity. So this would appear on my CV as January 1, 2017 to present. If I enter only an end date, then that's going to appear on my CV as this is something that only occurred on one day. So in this case, it would say that I answered 500 inquiries only on December 31st. If you do both a start date and an end date, then that's going to create the bracketed date range that you would be used to seeing. So in this case, it would appear as January 1, 2017 to December 31, 2017. For cases like this example where we're summarizing a year's worth of data, I recommend summarizing in 1-year increments instead of 2-year increments, because that allows you to roll over that year's data to the next year, to the next annual performance review. This is especially important for our pre-tenure faculty. So our pre-tenure faculty will be evaluated next year, 2019, for both 2018 and 2019 activities. And if we enter just 1-year increments, that allows them to reuse that 2018 data next year and not have to enter it again. For the tenured faculty, I still recommend summarizing in 1-year increments, because then if you ever wanted to use this information to create a CV for a time period that wasn't the same as our annual performance review time period, like say for a grant application or something, if you summarize in 1-year increments, it allows you to be more flexible with the date range that you're pulling. So all that being said, anything you enter into digital measures has to have at least a year associated with it, but beyond that, the day and month are optional. I know that for some things you might not remember the exact day that something happened on. To save this, I have two options. I can either save or save and add another. If I hit save, it'll take me back out to the list of all my consultation activities. If I hit save and add another, it would create the same screen again, but empty. So for now, I'm just going to hit save. So this is where your list of all of your consulting activities that you've entered would appear. From this list, you have a couple of options of things that you can do. If I check this box over here to the right, the first option I have is to completely delete out the entire record. Say I really messed up on this and I just want to start from scratch. I can hit the little trash can icon and that would completely delete that record. The other option I have is to duplicate the record. So if I select duplicate, it's going to create an exact copy of the information that I just entered. From here, one thing I could do is just update the date range. Let's say that I do approximately 500 inquiries every year. And so I really just need to update the dates on this. I can hit save. And now I have a record for my consulting activities with beef cattle producers for 2018 and one for 2017. Are we all good so far? Okay. So that example covers about 90% of what you would do when you are working with digital measures. Most of it is just referring to the data entry guide and what the relevant data fields are, and then populating those data fields in the user interface. Okay, so now let's talk about a few things that you don't need to worry about entering. The first is your numbered extension publications. I got a list of all of the numbered extension publications for 2017 and 2018 from Dennis DeRoss in Ag Communications, and those have been uploaded into digital measures for you. They appear on the screen called intellectual contributions. So they would appear on this intellectual contributions screen. The second thing that you wouldn't have to enter any information about is your Hatch Multi-State, McIntyre Stennis, or animal health projects. Any of these federal formula funding projects that you might be involved with. The research office has provided that information to us, and it's already been uploaded into the system for you. It appears on the screen, research non-OSPA. Regular grants and contracts that run through OSPA have been loaded into the system on the screen, research OSPA. There aren't any examples here, but let me back out and show you an example of that. Okay, so I'm on Dr. Hunter's profile now. I'm going to go to the Research OSPA screen, and here's where you would find your grants that run through OSPA. If I open one of these up, you'll see that there's little lock boxes next to some of the data. That means that you can't edit that data in digital measures because it's coming directly from OSPA. So if there was a problem with any of the data listed in this Research OSPA screen, you would need to email that information to me so that we can work on getting it corrected. There are two pieces of information that aren't available from OSPA that you would need to add in for your grants and contracts. The first is any co-investigators that are outside of the University of Kentucky. OSPA only provides University of Kentucky associated co-investigators, so you would need to add those in if they're outside of UK. The easiest way to do that is to use the add list of names function and copy and paste that list of co-investigators in, and then use the process list button, and that'll create a record for each of your co-investigators. The second box that OSPA isn't able to populate is the total requested funding box. This is going to be important for pending and closed or not funded grants, pending or not funded grants. If the grant wasn't funded, then OSPA is not going to provide the number of dollars that were associated with that application. And so you would want to add that in yourself so that you can show that you applied for a $5 million grant even if you didn't get it. Okay. Some of you may be teaching in addition to your extension work. Regular UK courses are imported for you on the scheduled teaching screen, and teacher course evaluations are imported for you on the teacher course evaluation screen, so you wouldn't need to enter any of those. Okay. From here, I'm going to go to the list of extension activities, and we'll kind of talk about these one by one. So we already talked about consulting. The next thing you might be doing is curriculum development. This would be if you have created a program that you yourself aren't necessarily running, but you give it to the extension agents to present in all of the counties. So you created the curriculum that others are teaching. So that's going to be entered on the screen, program and curriculum development, under the teaching heading. Okay, so program and curriculum development is here under the teaching heading. And add new item. And it would be important in this case to, again, populate that extension yes box if this is an extension curriculum rather than a regular college credit curriculum. And that way it would appear under the extension heading of your CV as opposed to the teaching heading of your CV. Okay, so that's how you would do curriculum development. Farm or community-based research. This is going to be research that you're doing, maybe like field trials or surveys of farmers markets is an example that I received from someone. It's going to be research that isn't represented by a publication or by funding that you've received for it. So other research that wouldn't appear on your CV elsewhere if it weren't for this screen. Again, the main example of this would be field trials. So that's going to go on the screen, extension, field, and community-based research, which appears under the extension heading in digital measures. These are screens that we had created specifically for extension, and so everything on these screens is considered relevant. So if I open this up and add a new item, I apologize, sorry. So let's do the example of some tobacco field trials. And we'll say that we've been running these trials for a year. You could enter whatever date range is relevant. For this, I'm going to posit that we have multiple fields throughout the state that we're testing in. But you could also put the research station at Princeton in the location box if you're doing your experiments at the research station. So I'm just going to say here, tobacco fields. And number of locations, this is going to be the number of tobacco fields. So we'll say 30. Number of participants, if you're doing like this example of field trial where it's like you're going to a discrete location and testing something in an actual farm field, you wouldn't need number of participants. Number of participants is more for social science research, maybe something more like Dr. Norman is doing. Like if you go to schools and you're surveying students about their nutrition and what they're eating, then you might put in the number of students that you surveyed as opposed to the number of locations. Your name's going to automatically be populated as a collaborator on the project. If you have co-collaborators, you can add them in. Funding source may or may not be applicable. If you have outside funding for this project, you can enter it. If not, just skip that box. And then the description box is a completely open text field where you can enter anything that you need to. So field tests. I am the primary researcher. So just a short description of whatever you're doing, and then again you would save or save and add another. Okay. Going back to the extension activities list, the next thing we're going to talk about is media contributions. These are going to be times when you have been interviewed by a media source, but you aren't the primary author of the resulting article. So, for instance, Dr. Hunter gives a lot of interviews to television about family budgeting. So if I go into her CV on the media contributions screen, these are all different television interviews that she's given. The way to decide if something should be listed as a media contribution or an intellectual contribution is if your name appears in the byline. So if your name appears in the byline, you should treat that as a publication that you yourself created and enter that as an intellectual contribution. If your name does not appear in the byline, you'd want to enter it as a media contribution. Now, you might say, well, I get interviewed like weekly. Do I really have to enter every single instance? And the answer is no. There is a way to summarize media contributions, and that's on this screen, Extension Media Summary. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to add a new item. Sorry, I have a question here. Let me check on that. So the question was, would podcasts be listed as radio or other? I'm going to say that's up to you. Maybe other and listed as a podcast. But that's a good question. And that is a good example of why we actually created this extension media summary screen, because our faculty are working in so many very different types of multimedia. This is a very flexible screen that would allow you to enter information about media that doesn't fit somewhere else. So podcasts, social media, like if you're running a Twitter, this would be a good place to enter like a Twitter or Facebook or a YouTube series. So I'm going to add a new item here. And let's use the example that you just mentioned of a podcast. So I'm going to, again, suggest on this screen that you summarize in 1-year increments. Okay, in the type of media, I'll write podcast. The editor role is, or the role is going to be the level of control that you have over the project. So if you're in charge of the whole project, list yourself as editor. If you are collaborating with someone else, you might be an associate or assistant editor. And if you're primarily just contributing to somebody else's media, then you would list yourself as a contributor. So we'll say that we're in charge of the podcast. This next box here, this is a very flexible box that we've created so that you can record how well your media is reaching the general public based on whatever metric that media uses to record that. So for podcasts, the relevant data might be 12 monthly episodes, 120 subscribers. Now for a YouTube series, it might be the number of videos and the total number of views on those videos. For a Twitter feed, it might be the number of tweets that you do and the number of followers that you have. You can also use this to, like I said, to summarize regular print media that you're doing on a regular basis. So if you have a column that you provide every month to local newspapers and it's picked up by a whole bunch of local newsletters or newspapers, you could summarize that here too with like 12 monthly columns picked up by 100 newsletters, approximately 12,000 readers. The description, you want to keep the description very brief because this is going to end up in a table. So I'm going to say turf Grass podcast. I am the main writer and narrator. Okay, and then I can save. This is another good screen to do the duplicate function on. So let's say I did the podcast in 2018 too. So I'm going to duplicate it and then enter 2018. And let's say maybe I increased my subscribers by a whole lot. I now have 1,200 subscribers. So I'll save. Okay, I'm going to show you now what this looks like on a CV. So from any page in Digital Measures, you can run a report. And so this is going to be the Rapid Reports button up here. And I'm going to choose the College of Ag FECV. Especially for our extension faculty members, it's important that you always choose this report because it's the only one that correctly reports extension activities. I'm going to select the review period, which is October 19th, 2016 to December 31st, 2018, and then run report. It downloaded here in the bottom of the screen as a Word document. I'm going to open that up. Okay, so this is how our CV looks now. Here's the extension media summary table that we just created. And so here you see the 2018 line for the podcast and the 2017 line for the podcast. You see why it's useful to report in one-year increments, because here I had a notable increase in the number of subscribers to my podcast, and by entering it as 2 separate years, then I can show that increase in my reach. You also see why it's important to keep your description brief, since it's going to show up in a table like this. I'm going to minimize and exit out of the reports function. And I'm actually going to delete these records out since this isn't something that Dr. Hunter actually did. Okay. So that's how you would summarize multimedia and social media. You can use the same system for summarizing newsletters. If you have a monthly newsletter that goes out, you can put it into that table just like we did with the podcast. Numbered publications, I mentioned, are automatically uploaded for you, so you don't need to do anything with your numbered publications. The exception to that would be if you have one that was published after about September 11th of this year. You might need to enter that yourself because September 11th was the date when I got the information from Ag Communications. So anything that's been published since then might still need to be entered. Okay, so the last thing we should talk about is presentations. So there's essentially 2 types of presentations that I hear about from extension faculty. The first is a one-time special presentation that you're just giving in one location, one topic. It's a discrete one-time thing that happened. The second type of presentation that I hear about is one that you might give 50 times in 50 different counties over the same topic or a very similar topic. So we don't want you to have to enter 50 different line items when you give the same presentation 50 times. And so what we've done is created a system for you to summarize presentations. Okay, so I'm going to go to my presentations instructions. So here at the top half of the screen, this is instructions for how you would enter one of those one-time presentations as just a single line item on your CV. And then the bottom half of the screen is instructions for how you would summarize presentations that you might have given multiple times in multiple locations. So the one-time presentations are going to be entered on the screen, Extension Education and Training Programs, and that's under the extension heading here. So extension education and training programs, add a new item. And this is a screen that we created specifically for cafes, so everything on the screen is a relevant data field. So program topic, this would be like the title of your presentation. Program type, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different program types here, and there's also an other option if you don't feel like any of these describe the type of training or education program that you've done. So let's say this is a seminar on beekeeping. Program scope, this is going to be how broad your audience was. So if you only invited people from one county, you would choose county. If you invited multiple counties, if you invited the whole state, if you invited people from multiple states, multiple or all across the nation, or international. International might come into play if you're doing a webinar and you don't really know where people are coming from. They might be coming to your webinar and watching it from other countries. So we'll just say this is a multi-county presentation on beekeeping, and we invited 3 neighboring counties. Sponsoring organization or county office. So let's say that this was put on by the Fayette County Extension Office. And then your role, there's a whole bunch of roles you could choose from here. We'll say I was the workshop leader for this whole beekeeping seminar, and I organized the whole thing. Participant type, this describes your audience. We'll say that this one was a presentation for the general public. And then number of participants, we'll say we had 20 people come. And then the description, this would be what exactly it was. Say it was a multi-day workshop on beekeeping for hobbyists. Okay, and so that's multi-day. We'll say it was January 1 to like January 5th. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. I apologize for coughing at you all. Okay, and save. Okay. So that's an example of how we would enter a one-time education or training program. Now, let's say that this is actually a beekeeping seminar series that I take on the road, and I do it in multiple counties across the state all throughout the year. I would still enter one example of what this type of training program is. So I could still enter the Fayette County example as my one example of the presentation, and then I can say in the description box, see summary for other instances of this presentation. Okay, and I'll save that. Now, the way I can summarize a presentation that I've given in multiple locations is to go to the screen extension presentation summary. I'm going to add an item. Okay, and I'm going to summarize in a 1-year increment. Okay, presentation type, this is a multi-county presentation. Let's say I did it 50 times. And my total attendance is going to be everybody that came to all 50 of those. It might have to be an estimate if you don't know exactly. So we'll say 500 people. And then beekeeping for hobbyists. See presentations list for full citation. So the two description boxes refer back to each other. Okay, and I'm going to run a report now so you can see what this looks like. Okay, so here And then my extension presentations summary is my list where I said that I gave the beekeeping presentation 50 times. And then here under education and training programs, here's my full citation for the beekeeping workshop series. So they refer back to each other, and it allows you to enter one description, but then show that you gave that presentation multiple times. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm gonna delete this record out now. While I delete this out, if you guys want to think of any questions and type them in for me, I have now shown you everything that I had hoped to be able to show you today, so I'll leave the rest of the time for any questions that you might have. Okay, the question is, can you copy and paste descriptions? And the answer is yes. You can copy and paste into boxes. So if you have a copy of your CV that you've been working on somewhere that's a Word document, you can just copy and paste into any fields in digital measures. Okay, and Dr. Ingram wants to see refereed publications. The refereed publications are going to appear on the screen, intellectual contributions. Some of these have already been entered for you. There's two reasons why you might already be seeing, well, three reasons that you might already be seeing entries in your intellectual contributions. The first is that numbered extension publications should already be there. The second is that publication data is shared between all of the co-authors. And so if one of your co-authors already entered a publication, then you don't have to re-enter the same publication. And then the third reason is that back in about July, I did an import from Web of Science of as many publications as I could find for our faculty and brought them into the system for you. A word of caution on those is that if you have a very similar name to another scholar that's publishing, or you have the exact same name, especially in a similar field, I might have made some errors in disambiguation and misattributed an article to you, and in that case, you would want to delete it out by checking the little box next to it and then delete. So I'm going to open this up. This is what the publications screen looks like. If you've imported the publications, a lot of this will be brought in for you. One place that you want to take note of is the extension yes/no box. If you want your publication to appear under the research heading of your CV, leave the extension box blank. If you want it to appear under the extension heading of your CV, then populate the extension box with yes. Another place to note for referee publications is the impact factor. For the ones that we already brought in for you from Web of Science, this will already be populated, but if you're adding any additional referee publications in, you would want to enter the impact factor if it's available. You should also check the peer-reviewed box because sometimes this information didn't correctly come over from Web of Science when we brought articles over. Okay, I have another question. Are news exclusives archived by Ag Communications? No, I wasn't able to get a list of those. So that's something that we can look into getting in the future. Sorry, I responded to Karen instead of Heather there, but no. So we weren't able to get a list of news exclusives from Ag Communications. So you would need to enter those yourself. possibly in a summary format if you're doing a whole lot of them, or as individual articles if you're doing them yourself. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I am trying to record this, and I hope that the recording worked well and that I'll be able to share it with you. Okay. I have a grant that employs extension associates that I supervise. I direct them and interact with them for lots of on-farm consultations, newsletters, etc. How does the system account for this? Okay. Does your grant run through OSPA? Okay. It should already show up in your Research OSPA screen then. If you want to add in the information about supervising your extension associates associated with that grant, there's a box for the description on the grant, and you can add in information about your supervisory activities there if you want it to be specifically associated with that grant. Okay, then we have a question. Do you have to enter presentations chronologically? The answer is no. They'll automatically be put into chronological order when the script runs to pull the. What about number of consultations other than mine personally? You mean like your extension agents that are associated with your program are doing consultations? Okay, yeah, so you can still enter that on the consultation screen, just in the descriptor field. Be sure to mention that these are consultations given by your associates and enter that as a separate item from the consultations that you are doing personally. Okay. Anything else? Where do we add non-extension popular press articles? That's going to still be on the intellectual contribution screen. If you see the contribution type, there's a whole lot of different publication types here, including here's like public or trade journal, magazine or trade publication, ebooks. There's all sorts of different types of publications that you can choose here. And the way that you would note that they're not extension is just by leaving the extension box empty, and then that's going to appear under research in your CV rather than extension. Now that's if you are the author of the article. If you were just interviewed for the article and your name's not in the byline, you should enter that on the media contribution screen. The main difference is that the media contribution screen doesn't automatically populate your name as the author of the publication. No problem. Okay. If there's no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and stop the presentation. And if you do come up with questions as you're working in the system later on, you can call me or email me anytime. I should be mostly at my desk for the next few weeks as we're leading up to the deadline for all of this. The deadline to have everything entered into Digital Measures is October 12th.